Part 2 of the conflict of male-centric desire in Femdom. You're listening to the Mistress Code. I'm RacyWilde. Even devoted subs can trigger resistance. In relative Femdom, where mutual desires are often weighed equally, reactance might be encouraged, but in absolute Femdom, such behavior can be seen as controlling. It is not questioning whether his desire is valid, but whether he expects that desire to be structurally integrated into a dynamic that is not his to author. If the domina senses that the sub is trying to manipulate her, that is not within the character of the dynamic. For example, a brat tamer and a brat dynamic is inherently frictional, then this can cause some conflict. Reactance is a psychological phenomenon in which individuals experience a negative emotional state, frustration, defensiveness, or irritation, when they feel their autonomy or freedom is being infringed upon. This applies not only to submissives, but to dominants as well. When an absolute domina feels emotionally or implicitly pressured to adopt activities she does not authentically desire, even when the pressure is soft, subtle, or framed as emotional discourse, her psychological reflex is often resistance, not necessarily to the act itself, but to the loss of sovereignty it represents. To clarify, the friction that follows is not about the activity, feminization for example, but about the unspoken shift from her leading to her sub trying to lead her. Even if she once considered the activity in abstract, she now feels that adopting it under these conditions would be a performance, a concession made not from authentic desire, but from appeasement. That is not female domination. That is servicing the submissive. And in absolute Femdom, this represents a structural breach of the erotic logic. So it is not the desire itself that is the problem. It is the insistence that it be accommodated, particularly when the instance disrupts the Femdom's fidelity to her own erotic truth. When the submissive begins to position his desire as indispensable to the contribution or health of the dynamic, the domina is no longer dominating. She is negotiating for peace under pressure. And that is precisely the moment when the power exchange has been diluted by dominant male desire. In a healthy, authentic, absolute Femdom dynamic, the domina remains open to knowing her submissive's desires, but she is not there to fulfill them on demand or on implication. She may incorporate them if they align with her own, but only if or when she finds them valuable within her design. But if not, she retains the right to decline, and that right is not up for discussion. I have one man-horse submissive who is dying for me to suck his cock. I tell him about my cock-sucking adventures with others, and I post up pics of me sucking my other submissive's cocks. I enjoy tormenting him. He tells me how much he desires for me to do that to him, but he never asks me to do it. And because of that, I'm more attracted to him. It intensifies our dynamic. Have I ever sucked his cock? Never. Not ever in the 8 years we have known each other. But he is waiting, patiently, allowing me to decide. That is submission to the highest degree. Fairness is not the measure of truth in Femdom. The instinct to negotiate is not inherently male, but the structure of how one negotiates, particularly under patriarchy, often reveals who is culturally trained to lead and who is trained to adapt. In egalitarian models, including relative femdom, negotiation functions as a balancing act. Each partner brings their preferences, desires, and goals to the table, and an agreement is shaped through mutual compromise. On the surface, this seems ethical and fair, and it is, if fairness is the goal. But fairness is not the governing logic of absolute femdom. Truth is. The truth of the domina's erotic orientation, the truth of her sovereign authority, the truth of her female-authored power. An example, in relative femdom, if the submissive likes feminization but the dominant doesn't, they might still incorporate feminization into the dynamic because it's fair. In return, the submissive may agree to endure as CBT, even if it's not his preference, but she enjoys it. Mutual compromise, equal expression, fairness. But fairness is not authenticity. Fairness is a virtue of collaboration. It does not belong in a hierarchy, even when it is ethical, such as absolute femdom. In absolute femdom, the domina does not perform acts that are not her desire. She does not feminize because the submissive enjoys it. If it is not one of her core erotic truths, it is excluded. And this is not about cruelty or selfishness or arrogance. It is about clarity. Her femdom is not a buffet where preferences are balanced. It is a structure where only that which flows from her true desire has power. The submissive still has value. His preferences still have meaning, but they are no longer directive. They are information, not demands. The domina may use such or may not, and because of this, the submissive gets to experience a power dynamic that is no longer a performance based on his fantasy, but a real encounter with her truth. However, for most men, to get to this stage requires unlearning the dominant cultural script in which desire automatically entitles him to satisfaction. Under patriarchy, male desire is presumed active, sovereign, and outcome-driven. It is the driver of the erotic. For centuries, it was thought that women didn't even have the capacity for erotica. Hence the novel The Story of O, written by a woman in spite of this. Women may enjoy, even participate, but the man's arousal is the signal of success. He gets to initiate, to presume, and to direct. And so when men encounter a woman whose desires exist independently of theirs, whose yes is not conditioned on their yes, they interpret that independence as rejection. Submissive men need to overcome this rejection when they don't get what they want, to get over the idea that their desires function as the power that drives the dynamic. The false neutrality of egalitarian negotiation. Desire, like power, is never neutral. In relative femdom, the negotiation is framed as a partnership activity. The domina and the submissive are equal agents, designing a dynamic that satisfies both. But what often gets overlooked is that women are conditioned from birth to accommodate. They are taught to frame their desires in relation to others, to consider not just what they want, but who else needs, how much, and at what cost. And this is what I call a maternalism mindset. Thus, even when a relative domina believes she is asserting herself, she may still be including the submissive's desires within her own desires automatically and unconsciously. She has been trained to consider others since she was a little girl. And so, even as she negotiates her dominance, She is also scanning, will he enjoy this? Will this satisfy him? Am I giving enough? Am I being fair? This is a social and cultural training that a lot of femdoms struggle with and must overcome to be true to themselves. Even the experienced domina have gone through a method of deconditioning this reflex. To do so means the domina discovers what she wants without filtering it through another person's desires. It teaches her to center herself not as a performer or provider, but as the source of erotic power. And until that centering is active, she cannot truly dominate from her truth. This deconditioning is a gradual and often painstaking process. It involves unlearning a lifetime of gendered socialization, unraveling a childhood and adolescence shaped by expectations to serve, soothe, or satisfy others. Within a femdom dynamic, many women are still in the process of discovering themselves. The domina may still be shedding the internalized patriarchal residue that conditioned her as a little girl to prioritize others' needs over her own. At times, she may not yet fully grasp the depth or shape of her own erotic desire because, for the first time in her life, she is exploring it without obligation. However, she often has the amazing support of her submissive. This means she must be granted the space to evolve. Her power will not be static. Her erotic truth may unfold in unexpected ways, and what the submissive originally consented to may no longer fully describe the femdom he is in a year or two later. To demand inclusion of his desires is not submission. When a man insists that his preferences are factored into a woman's truth, he is not just expressing desire, he is reasserting his dominance. While the relative domina accommodates this, the absolute domina must decline, not because she lacks compassion, but because she honors the integrity of what is emerging in her. However, the submissive's desires are not ignored. They are not dismissed, but they are also not sovereign. The absolute domina's erotic truth is what governs their dynamic, and within that truth, she may choose to incorporate his desires, not as an obligation, but as a dominative act. This is how the submissive's desires are transformed from his scripts into her instruments. The domina does not perform his desires. She uses them for discipline, for reward, for denial, and for her own pleasure. Thus, the paradox of absolute femdom is that everything has equal ethical value, but not equal power. The essence of female-centric desire is not directed by the man. It is revealed by the woman.